Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Kathy Wright, and I am Boost Manager of Strategic Contracting and Procurement. Welcome to our final presentation this month, New GSA Schedules and Modifications. Our presenter today is Sean Laird. Sean is a Senior Contracts and Training Consultant with Boost and helps our clients with contracts training. She offers online classes on topics ranging from contracts for project managers to deep dives on compliance topics. She also does all things contracts, from redlining and negotiating NDAs, teaming agreements, and subcontracts, along with everything else that happens in a day-to-day contract shop. The presentation portion of today's event will last around 30 to 45 minutes, and we will conclude with a question and answer session for the last 15 minutes. Please use the Zoom questions feature to send me your questions as they come up, and I'll pass them to Sean at the end. In the next few days, we're going to make all 4 of this month's presentations available through Boost's website at boostllc.net. We know you're going to enjoy today's presentation, so let's get started. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on GSA schedules and modifications. I'd like to thank you, of course, for taking some time out of your busy schedules right now to join us for what I hope will be some helpful tips and insights regarding GSA. So let's go. As you can see, we're going to talk about some recent procurement changes, specifically where GSA is concerned, and how you can use your GSA schedule more strategically. Okay. Then, of course, we're going to talk about new GSA schedules and what the requirements are for those, and some tips and things to keep in mind where modifications are concerned that can definitely help you in growing your work under your GSA schedule. Next slide, please. Okay. Current minefield of federal procurement landscape. So, as many of you probably already know, and definitely the reason that everybody has been hearing GSA for the last several months, and definitely the last several weeks, revolves around a new executive order that was issued in March of this year, and it is 14240, and it's titled Eliminating Waste and Saving Tax Dollars, by consolidating procurement. Okay, so what does this mean, right? And certainly, what does it mean to us as government contractors? So basically, it is that agencies and departments that typically relied on, yes, maybe GSA, but also some of their internal or department or agency self-established vehicles, such as Army ITES or NASA SOUP or any of their internal MACs. A lot of agencies and departments are very big on creating their internal MACs and soliciting competition that way. They are now going to be required to consolidate and centralize the purchasing of, by using new and existing GSA vehicles. That could be via GSA MAS or using GSA administered GWACs. Okay. Of course, the intent being to streamline procurement of common goods and services, right? All the details are not laid out yet. They're still working on those, but generally what it means is that, like I said, things are going to be consolidated moving forward under GSA. And GSA administration, of course, and OBM are working on that guidance and going to be issuing that as it comes along. Next slide. One of the first questions I think that comes to mind for people, of course, when you read this or you hear about this, is they keep talking about common goods and services, right? That's what it refers to, common goods and services. What does that mean? Okay. If you go under GSA, you'll be able to find there are 10 categories, okay, that are established. Some of them may change with the new guidance that comes out, and may be broadened, or that is yet to be determined. But as of right now, there are 10 categories that are defined as common goods and services. Okay, and that's what these are. So when you're wondering and there's talk going on, or all about this, like I said, this new executive order and consolidating under GSA, keep in mind that it's not just IT products and services. It is a wider range that's going to be impacted by this executive order and by this push to centralize under GSA. Okay, specifically, I think a lot of impact is going to come from the professional services category, right? A lot of times people think typically you've got your wage determination categories tend to be used more on the GSA schedule with some professional services, but there's now going to be a push, again, across, the government to use the GSA vehicles for anything that's considered a common goods and services, and that's going to include professional services as well. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind about this new executive order is that while previously and often the DoD agencies, as well as NASA and the Coast Guard, are often exempted, in this particular one, they are not. Okay. And that's going to be a key difference for those departments and those contracting officers, and for GSA contracting officers as well, is that a lot of that work for these common goods and services, like your IT, like your human capital, like your professional services, are going to be included in this consolidation and this push to use GSA vehicles. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here since we have a natural break in the presentation. Let's do our first polling question. And so for the audience out there, this is multiple choice. How familiar are you with GSA MAS? First answer, we have one, we actively monitor, we're all over this. We submit proposals all the time. Second one, we have one, we check every once in a while, and every once in a while we do respond to a solicitation. We have one, but we don't really pay much attention to it because most of our contracts are elsewhere. And then lastly, we don't have one, but I think if you're here today, it's because you're aware of the executive order and you're strongly considering adding one. And the results are coming in and it is close. So Sean, I see 45% of our audience does not have a multi-award schedule. We have 36% that are on it. They're in there doing it, living the dream, winning work. We have some people that have one, but they haven't really done much with it. And actually no one answered that in between. Well, I have some and every once in a while I look at it and like that.
Yeah.
So interesting. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it back over to Sean for the next section.
It's very interesting mix, and I'm glad to hear that, especially for those that either rarely using it, maybe because of the type, maybe you've been in that DoD realm where it's not utilized as much, or with agencies that are using their internal MAC processes as opposed to GSA, and obviously a lot of people that are now wanting to gain some of that, knowledge and understanding of, what this whole GSA MAS thing is and why is it suddenly so, all over the news and all over the conversations that are being had around GovCon now. So thank you. And hopefully this will help with you. So again, obviously, just like with anything else, when you're starting off, you want to understand what it is to begin with. Okay. So first and foremost, when you're talking about GSA MAS, and that's a multiple award schedule is what MAS stands for. You'll also hear it referred to as a GSA schedule, or in the FAR, it's going to be referred to as a federal supply schedule. Okay, so all of those different terminologies that you'll hear all mean the same thing. That's your GSA MAS. Okay, and it is a government-wide contract vehicle that GSA administration or administers. Okay, they issue these schedules and they administer them, again, for the purpose of buying commercial products and services. Okay. You submit a proposal, which we're going to talk a little bit of the details about in that just a moment. But the purpose of this is to allow the government to have these vehicles in place, these MAS schedules in place of vetted vendors for commercial products and services. It allows things to move quickly, or at least more quickly than in, in a situation where you're having to compete in an open market situation without an established list of vendors and prices and compliance in place. It provides market support in that, again, government buyers are able to go out and see, okay, how many people do we have out there and how many reliable contractors do we have out there, excuse me, that we can use to fill this requirement, right? Instead of having to go out with an open solicitation going blind. It is generally a long-term contract, so you do want to keep that in mind. Yes, it's a lot of work getting that initial GSA contract in place. However, they generally run for 20 years with all of your option periods. So this is definitely a long-term benefit and growth opportunity for you as a company. Next slide. "99% of the time, you're going to hear about, your typical federal government agencies and departments, right? Your DoD agencies, your NIHs, your FEMA, all of those agencies. And yes, these are people and organizations that can purchase under your GSA schedule, but it's good to keep in mind that there's other things and other opportunities that you can have access to under your GSA schedule. Okay, so your federal is going to cover all of your executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Okay, but your state and local, there are cooperative purchasing agreements, there are disaster purchasing agreements, and different programs where state and local and tribal governments can purchase using the GSA schedules. So, by getting getting a GSA schedule and monitoring it and using it, there's additional growth that you can get outside of just your typical federal agencies. Okay. In addition to which, of course, your Puerto Rico, Guam, US Virgin Islands, and there's even some nonprofit and educational institutions that are allowed to purchase using your GSA schedule. Okay. So one, I think it's important to keep that in mind because, again, a lot of times when you hear GSA, all you usually hear in that conversation is that you're talking about your executive and legislative branches, as well as when you're doing your marketing. Keep these other avenues in mind as well. Next slide. Okay, so again, we keep hearing more about this GSA thanks to the executive order. So, why is this important? And I think, based on that question that we had, right? A lot of you are on here to find out about it. Like, why now, right? Why do I need to be paying closer attention to this than I did previously? And again, it has to do with the shifting in policies. A lot of that money that the government is spending on common goods and services is now going to have to be directed to those consolidated efforts under GSA. Okay. Enhancing your credibility, it simplifies your procurement processes, like I mentioned a moment ago, because again, you've already been vetted, you're already eligible to, you have your SAM.gov entity registration, you're already eligible, you've done your reps and certs, you're eligible to receive awards without there having to be delays involved. As part of your schedule, you're going to have pre-approved pricing that's included and that you're going to be advertising as part of that. The government's going to know that, hey, this is a reputable person. GSA has already screened them. They have past performance. They have the finance systems in place to be able to be compliant with the requirements of government contracting. All of those things make you more attractive than someone that is responding to an open solicitation. The government is taking a greater risk in that situation, right? So all of these things are going to help you out when you're looking for those opportunities and when you're proposing on those opportunities. Okay, next slide. Again, we're talking about the strategic importance of these schedules, right? And so I did want to point out for everybody that the other side of this, like I said, like I mentioned, yes, we're going to be pushing and using GSA schedules, but you also want to pay attention to some of the GSA administered GWACs that are out there, or government-wide acquisition contracts, especially when you're talking about IT, because again, this is where stuff is moving, right? And in order to get on these GWACs, unlike your agency or your department level MAC IDIQs, in order to get on these, you have to have a GSA MAS. So this is another level of growth for you. Once you get that MAS established, then you're eligible to start participating and submitting proposals under the government-wide acquisition contracts that GSA administers. And as you can see on the screen, a lot of these run for many, many years. Generally, they're going to have a 5-year base and option periods involved. So sometimes there's ones that are set aside, like your 8A stars or your vets, and then others that, are more open and have, greater reach as to who it is that can be on these and, win opportunities underneath them. But as you do see, all of them have rather large dollar ceilings attached to them. Okay. And of course that is spread over the entire GWAC. That's not per awardee by any means. But again, that's a pretty big pool to be playing in, and, definitely worth the effort. Alliance 3, just for anybody that's wondering, that one, the third version, the RFP has already dropped for that. So if it's something, if you do have your MAS and it's something you think you might be interested in, it's certainly worth looking into. They have already opened the solicitation for the follow-on version. It'll be Alliant 3. Polaris is still evaluating some. There is currently a stay under the small business set-asides that have been awarded, but they are evaluating the other pools. And of course, waiting with bated breath for that stay to be released so they can start using it. So next slide.
Okay, it's time for polling question number 2 before we get into the new GSA MAS. This question is, who on your team handles your GSA MAS? And it's multiple choice again, right? Either someone in your management, or maybe you have a dedicated contracts manager. You might outsource. There's some GSA shops out there that can do this, or maybe it's a team effort, right? Sometimes smaller businesses, it's all hands on deck. And the answers are coming in. Okay, we did get responses to all 4 choices this time, Sean. It looks
Good.
it's close though. It's pretty much an even mix. I would say 50-50 between companies that have their own contracts person, or it's all hands on deck, right? It's a team sport, so everybody plays in the GSA MAS sandbox. And then also equal is those who outsource to a GSA shop, or someone in management takes care of that schedule. So
Okay.
great. Thank you everyone for participating. And Sean, back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that is very good information to have, because the important thing is, I think sometimes when people first are getting into GSA, there's that apprehension that falls with it, as to, okay, GSA is just this different animal that we're not used to. And don't get me wrong, they do have their quirks. Anybody that's worked with them and in that environment will tell you, but certainly nothing to be afraid of. So when we're talking about your GSA schedule and you're wanting to get a new GSA schedule, right? Because we had a lot of you that said that you didn't have one yet. So just a basic overview of what's going to be involved with that. You're going to be responding to a solicitation, and that solicitation is located out on sam.gov. You're going to need to, they do have certain steps, or certain criteria, I should say, that you have to meet, which we'll talk about in just a moment. You're going to prepare and submit an offer to that solicitation to GSA. And then eventually you will negotiate and clarify with a GSA contract specialist and contracting officer to address any questions, negotiate any of the final terms that need to be negotiated, and then you'll be awarded a GSA schedule if all goes well. So we're going to dive into that a little bit further in the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, yes, there are, there are certain criteria that you as a government contractor need to meet in order to be eligible to submit a proposal and be awarded a GSA MAS. Okay. First and foremost, they're going to, you need to make sure that your products and services are of a caliber that the government is willing to accept. So you want to make sure that you are using good, reliable OEM type goods and services that are reputable and of the caliber that they need to be and meet the qualifications. Commercial. Everything under GSA is commercial by definition. So you want to make sure that what you're including on there are commercial products and services. Okay. You will need to have been in business for a minimum of 2 years and be able to have financial statements to support that. Okay, so that is one key, especially if you're new to government contracting, that you do want to keep in mind in order to get a GSA schedule. As you can see on the next one, there's certain kind of check marks that you're going to need to be able to show. Generally, again, if you've been in GovCon for that 2-year minimum, then you're going to be able to reach these benchmarks as far as your acceptability. And again, this goes back to that vetting that we were talking about, right? They're vetting you to make sure that you're a reliable source for the government, because any of the agencies that are then going to use your GSA MAS to order things are expecting that you are a reliable contractor and that GSA has already done this vetting. So that's what that section is talking about. And then of course your pricing. Your pricing is going to have to be deemed, just like in non-GSA world, your government agencies, anybody that's spending government dollars and taxpayer dollars has to ensure that the prices are fair and reasonable for the products and services that they're purchasing. So GSA is going to be performing that same type of assessment on your proposal that you submit. And that'll then become part of your approved price list for your GSA schedule. Okay, next slide. Okay. So of course, the big undertaking of submitting a proposal for your GSA MAS. And again, keep in mind, like I said earlier, that this is a 20-year opportunity. As long as you meet all those benchmarks and yes, it's a little time consuming and I'm not going to lie, a little expensive to get there, because it is a rather large endeavor to submit the proposal for a GSA MAS. However, the benefits really as long as you're in that field of those commercial products and services, they certainly can pay off. And the opportunities are only growing under GSA. Okay. So again, these are kind of just the basic 5 steps that you're going to follow and the type of information that you're going to need to gather and decisions you're going to need to make in order to get that proposal put together. Okay. Of course, first and foremost, you're going to have to look at the solicitation. And the solicitation, I will tell you now, includes about 25 attachments or so. So it is a rather large, in-depth solicitation that you're going to be working through. Okay. Your registration, of course, in sam.gov, getting your entity registered, getting access to the e-offer account from GSA, because that's where you're going to be submitting your proposal through. This is not one of those it's done through email or some other some other avenue. It is going to go through the e-offer portal. And then big part of what you're going to be doing is SINs. And for those of you that aren't familiar, that's a special identity item number. So each labor category is going to fall under a SIN. Okay, and then the SINs are a little bit broader. They're not exactly a NAICS code, but they do have some similarities to NAICS codes. GSA has worked to, make it a little bit easier for government contractors in recent years. And so they do have some similarities and crossover with your NAICS codes. but there's different categories that you're going to fall, whether it's products or services. There's different categories that all of your offerings are going to fall under, and those are called sins. So you're going to have to, you'll go through the process of figuring out which one of those really match what it is you're selling. And those are the ones that you're going to want to put on your schedule. Okay. As part of those attachments that I was talking about here, there's 3 of them that are listed here because these are probably, I want to say probably the 3 most important ones that you're going to deal with when you're putting that proposal together, because of course it's talking about your pricing and your terms, and that's going to be your bulk of it, right? Is making sure that you have all that information in place. And then of course, that's the supporting documentation that you see listed there. Again, that's part of those attachments that I was referring to. And these things go back to that vetting of you as well, right? They're, in a nutshell, these are what these supporting documents are talking about. It's all of the compliance and, reviewing to make sure that you meet the benchmarks that need to be made, that, to make sure that the government's not taking an unacceptable risk in reaching out and awarding you government contracts. Okay. So again, this is just a brief, like I said, it's a rather in-depth solicitation and process. And this is just a brief kind of overview and look at the basics of what those steps are going to include. Next slide. Okay. On a whole, in the simplest form, these are basically the kind of like the 3 guardrails you're going to be going through, right, in the whole process of itself. And so, of course, again, you're going to do that solicitation, get your proposal together, you're going to get that submitted. Once you get that submitted, you're going to get a GSA specialist and or contracting officer assigned to you, and they're going to complete, and GSA as a whole is going to complete a review of your proposal. Okay. This can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months or longer. There's no hard and fast that says it's only going to be 6 months, and they can't exceed that 6 months. So do keep in mind, this is an average or an approximate wait time. And then eventually you're going to get to that point where you're going to be negotiating with them and finalizing your terms and finalizing your pricing, or providing additional information to support that pricing if necessary. Often that happens. And finalizing that, and then hopefully within a year is average time and planning is anywhere from 6 months to a year from start to finish, to be able to obtain that schedule. Once you obtain that schedule, then the fun really begins. And then you can start, you'll have your price catalog and you'll be uploading that and getting your name out there and getting your information out there that, hey, we now have a GSA MAS. Look what we can do. Okay. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to break right here. We do have another polling question. For those of you in the audience that have questions for Sean, I'm going to ask, please put your questions in the Zoom questions portal rather than the chat. We're sort of aggregating them there together so that we ask one question rather than 5 that are all very similar. So really appreciate the ones that are coming in, and the more that I know will come in before we finish. And we do have one more polling question for today. This time is the last time we updated our MAS offerings and pricing was within the last 6 months, during COVID, during our last option exercise, or what? We're supposed to update? In other words, we really haven't updated so far. But I think Sean's going to share with us in the next section that you can do updates, right? There's a mechanism in the system to do that. So Sean, we have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and should.
And should, absolutely. So we have a very, it's like there are only 2 of these options that have been selected by the audience.
Okay.
71% are saying they've done this in the last 6 months, and 29% are like, what? What? Update? So I'm glad you're here today, and don't feel bad. I think there's a common misconception out there that somehow we're supposed to use our crystal ball, project prices for the next 20 years, and set it and forget it. And so don't worry, it is a common misconception by
Absolutely.
GSA schedule holders. All right, so back to you, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, Kathy, I think sometimes what happens too is, you may have gotten a GSA schedule in the very beginning, and you got it put in place, and then have just kind of like left it because maybe most of your work has been on non-GSA. And now that GSA has come back to the forefront, it's like, oh, okay, I need to get this updated. What can I do? Right? What can I do to make sure that I'm ready for this change and this shift that's coming? Okay. And that's just as important, right? So again, modifications, yes, they are certainly something that happens. If you have a GSA schedule, you're used to the refreshes that come out. Those are modifications coming out from GSA to you. Usually those have to do with changes that are happening in clauses or procedures or things of that nature that the government is updating to your GSA MAS. And then there are modifications that you as the MAS holder can and should be, keeping track of and submitting as needed, right? That's going to increase your marketability of your schedule and increase your growth and ability to make a profit, right? And keep moving and keep growing. Because let's face it, that's all what we want to do, right? we want to make sure that we keep playing in this wonderful pool of government government contracting. And how do we keep doing that? Well, we have to make sure that our offerings and what we're providing to the government are relevant and up to date and reasonably priced. Okay. And as we grow as a company, we want to make sure that our GSA schedule does that as well. Okay. So whether you started your schedule and you're now in your option year 3, and while you were working in this round, you've now expanded and you've got multiple rounds that you're working in, we're now in IT. We're now going into, more professional services than we had before. We had some, but when we did it, or the last time we exercised our option, we really only had maybe 4 or 5 labor categories, and now we've expanded, we're growing, and we want to make sure that our schedule reflects that. So when buyers are out there looking at it, they're going to see, hey, they offer all of this. And you're not going to have to do as much of that crosswalk to, those 4 categories when you're trying to justify your labor, how your labor categories, align with what the government solicitation says. Okay. So as you can see on the screen, you'll see lots of different things. Some of them I've mentioned in this just now. But again, double checking your rates. Okay. Yes, you can submit for increases to your rates, and yes, you should. Okay. Because again, we all know the vast changes that have happened in the marketplace just in the last few years, much less if your rates for your GSA schedule were originally submitted 10 years ago. Okay. No one predicted the things that have happened in the last few years that have caused such crazy increases in the market rates of things. And the government recognizes that, right? Which is why in your GSA MAS schedule, there are mechanisms in place, including economic price adjustment clauses, that allow you to submit for increases to your rate on your schedule. And there's ways to do that. And, again, it's with GSA, it's all about providing the documentation and the justification. Each of them is a little bit different depending on why it is you're submitting for those increases. So the documentation is going to vary, but it's certainly not something that you want to shy away from. Because again, you want to make sure not only are you being marketable to the government, but you want to make sure that your rates are enough that you can successfully staff your government contracts with skilled people and still stay within those rate restrictions of your GSA schedule, right? And as salary and price increases are happening, that has an impact, right? And you want to make sure that, like I said, you can still staff, you can still perform under your GSA rates. Okay. Maybe you have branched out and you want to add a new SIN. you're happy with the labor categories you have under the current SIN, but you want to be able to add more SINs to your mass schedule. Definitely something you should do. Reach out. Again, it's all about having that supporting documentation and making sure that you have everything you need to support that. But that's part of your growth, and you want to make sure, again, as you're growing as a company and you're growing in the offerings that you can provide for the government, that your mass schedule is reflecting that. Okay, so keep current on it. Update your contract information on there. If you've got contact information that has changed, make sure that your price list that's out on eLibrary and or GSA Advantage has been updated. Make sure that information is reflecting good POCs, the most recent offerings and the most recent mod that you had approved. Once those mods are approved, once that modification that you submitted to add a SIN or increase your prices, or any of the information in that modification has been approved, you also are going to need to go and update your price list that's out on the portals, right? Keep everything current and up to date. Okay. And then most importantly, how do I keep, how do I keep these opportunities coming? How do I find more opportunities, right? Stay visible. Again, like I said, keep it updated, but also make sure that you're sharing it. Do you have it on your web page that you have a GSA MAS or that you're on a GSA WAC? All of those things are things that are going to help you maximize and help you grow within the GSA MAS environment. Okay. And again, like we spoke about in the beginning, now more important than ever. Okay. And again, these things don't happen overnight when you're submitting these modifications, when you're deciding what SINs to add, when you're gathering your information to support price increases, when you're updating your pricing list after modification, all of those things, there's time associated with them. So now is the time to start having those conversations internally, to start thinking about, okay, how can we do this? We know this shift is coming. It's coming. It's coming. What can we do now to help prepare for that, to get ready? So that when we do find that solicitation that we want to be part of, or we do have an opportunity to join a contract team, a MAS contract teaming arrangement, we're ready. Next slide, please.
All right, that was great information. And, I've been working with GSA mostly since my time at Boost, but I learned a lot today, Sean. Thank you for that. So, key takeaways: understand the current landscape, which is changing, right? The executive order is going to shift a lot more work over to the GSA schedule and the GSA GWACs. And there is a lag time. So, hey, what are the odds that we'll have an on-time budget for this government fiscal year? Really, really low if you look at the statistics. So it's not too late. I think it's time. You still have time to get a schedule if you don't have one, or to update your schedule if you do, and certainly probably to update your pricing. The steps are here to get on the schedule. If you need help with that, Boost is here. We would love to help you with that. And we can also give you some tips on how to strategically maximize the impact of that schedule once you have it, and maintaining it, keeping it fresh so that you're never trapped under old rates that you can't exceed. So really good information today, Sean.
Absolutely. No, I hope that everybody has at least grabbed a couple tips and tidbits from this, and a little bit more insight into GSA MAS schedules, and not only what they are, but again, also making sure that you're keeping yours up to date, you're expanding as much as you can, you're making sure that you're paying attention to those opportunities in a way that maybe you haven't before, due to the shifting priorities of the legislation, as well as where those tax dollars are now being spent. And of course, that's changing as well, right? I do want to let everybody know that, for Boost itself, I know some of you mentioned that you do things internally, and some of you mentioned, you're having a GSA shop, but I also want to let you know that, of course, Boost is we offer contracting support, and that is from A to Z to include GSA support. And sometimes it helps, honestly and truly, sometimes it helps to have somebody that's helping you with your contracting strategy as a whole, as opposed to siloing that GSA work, because again, they do interact with each other. And GSA support is not just, oh, will you handle my refreshes, or oh, can you upload my new price list? There's a lot to it. And again, the more things are shifting, the more they start to figure out and assess how they're going to implement this new executive order. Excuse me, your GSA schedule is going to become a more strategic part of how you operate with the government and how you win opportunities. So it's certainly something we can help you with as well. If it's anything from obviously your initial solicitation and helping you get that documentation prep and get it reviewed and get it in place, all the way through your contract, after award, your contract maintenance, your IFF payments, your sales reporting, all of those things that you need to do under that GSA MAS to stay compliant. So
Awesome. Thank
any
you so
questions
much.
at all, feel free to reach out.
We do have some, Sean.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
my hunch, I think we're going to see a lot of activity over the next couple of years. So,
Absolutely.
okay, let's see. First question. Does the government have a timeline for analyzing my GSA schedule proposal? If they get flooded at the at the end of this year when their new GFY kicks off, can they put me
Sure.
on hold indefinitely?
Unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, there's no hard and fast, right? There's no regulation for them or policy that says, hey, we have to, we've got a new proposal in, we have to have this reviewed by X number of days. Okay. However, like I mentioned, in general, within that 4 to 8 weeks, 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to receive a response, and that's going to assign you a GSA contract specialist. They are required to assign a GSA contract specialist / and or contracting officer to any new proposal that's received. So once you receive that notification and that assignment of a person, that's at least going to give you somebody within GSA that you can work with. And they, based on their workload, based on your proposal, and all the other factors that kind of get thrown up in the air, they're going to be able to give you probably a better timeline. Like I said, historically, on average, it's running about 6 to 12 months.
Gotcha. But there's no rule. They don't have any rules.
Unfortunately, no, there's no hard and fast that, hey, we received this, we have to have it done by X number of days.
Gotcha.
I
Gotcha.
wish there were.
Well, you're probably not alone there. How do I market you mentioned marketing, right? How do I market my GSA schedule? I heard there's some restrictions on that.
There can be, but it's actually, I mean, they're actually a little more lenient than I think a lot of people think, right? So once you have that, once you have your GSA MAS, of course, yes, marketing yourself under that is up to you, right? How much or how little you do, obviously, generally is going to have an impact. So how can you market it? One of the great ways is to make sure that you are using keywords, keyword rich descriptions, both in your products and in your services within your schedule, because that's, that price list that you update, that's going to be put out on eBuy, which is, something that is used for keyword searches. So, keep that in mind when you're doing your descriptions or your labor category names and things of that nature. The other thing we can encourage you to do is dedicate a landing page on your website, on your company website, to your GSA schedule. Okay. Put that out on there. Make sure that people, when they're going to your website and checking things out, they know, hey, these guys have a GSA schedule, or these guys not only have a schedule, but they're also part of, the 8A stars or the Alliant 2. That gives us even more opportunity that we can do. And believe it or not, you are allowed to use logos from GSA on your website next to those contract numbers, and including with the GWACs. Not only are you allowed to use them on your website, next to your contract information, but also on marketing materials, as long as it's approved under the specific GWAC that you're on. When in doubt, I absolutely advise you to ask the question, go to the vendor portals, go to, the question email or the vendor support on your GWAC and ask those questions. Where can I use the logos? I know I'm allowed to market this, but how am I allowed to market it? You will get a response, and usually pretty quickly on that. So include those logos and things like that. Network with government buyers, responding to RFIs. When you're responding to those RFIs, let them know that you have a schedule or that you're on this GWAC. The government contracting officers, when they're sending out those RFIs, whether it's an RFI through GSA or not, when they're sending out those RFIs, they're looking for contractors to let us know, where can we buy this stuff? That's one of the main points of it. Yes, they're trying to figure out who's out there and who's available. Should we set aside this or that kind of thing? But it's also, what vehicles can we use to do this? And especially for those agencies that are now going to be shifting towards GSA that maybe aren't as familiar. So make sure that you're using all those avenues.
Gotcha. So next question. For an LCAT or SIN modification as a small business with a lot of experience as a subcontractor, what's the best way to expand the offering? Can they just add SINs and LCATs that they know they can support without prior performance?
So that's going to be one of those things that you're going to work with your GSA specialist, your contract specialist on, in the modification that you submit for that. So a lot of it's going to depend on what the requirement is for that specific SIN and for that specific LCAT. But as a whole, you don't generally need to be able to show established prior performance in order to be able to add that labor category under that SIN or add that SIN. Okay. When you're talking about your rates, you're going to have to justify your rates. But as far as, do I have past performance to actually show, in your modification, hey, we've done this work this X amount of times, that generally is not going to be a requirement, as long as you can support that price.
Okay. And this is a similar question. Are subcontractors required to have a MAS? And I think it's an interesting because of your webinar yesterday, right? It's another, it depends. Yeah.
It does. So there's kind of two ways to look at it, right? Generally, if you're it depends on what kind of teaming arrangement you're involved in. Okay. So if you're talking about a typical prime sub, which may be where you've lived thus far, the prime is the one that has to have that GSA schedule, because the prime is the one that is technically responding to the solicitation. However, under GSA MAS, and again, we're going to make all of the webinars available to you. So one of the things that we talked about in the one yesterday is GSA contracting. Sorry, GSA contracting teaming arrangements under your MAS is definitely, it's a little bit unique and different. And in that situation, it allows companies to be co-primes. In that situation, you would need a GSA MAS. So while currently you may have been operating in that subcontractor field, if you're interested in being a prime and or joining a MAS CTA arrangement where you're a co-prime, then you would need to get that MAS schedule established.
Gotcha. So to recap, that's all the questions we have from the audience, but these were good. I just want to recap this. So if you want to add SINs and LCATs to your schedule, you are going to need some past performance, right? Because if otherwise, everybody's GSA schedule would have every LCAT on every SIN, and it would sort of defeat the purpose.
Absolutely.
So the contracting officer is going to go through that. But I don't think it has to necessarily be past performance as a prime to the government.
Right.
Your
exactly.
the person who asked the question, yep, thank you. Your subcontract performance working under a prime to the federal government is a good thing, right? Especially if you can get those primes to give you something in writing about your past performance,
yes,
or if you can show that you won this, and then afterwards, because you won that and did great, you won another and another, right? If you have a relationship and continuing awards, that's going to do the trick. Because remember, your contracting officer, when they're evaluating your proposal for a GSA schedule, they're looking for like basically three things. Vetting. Sean talked about vetting quite a bit. Like, are you qualified? Are you for real? Have you been in business a couple of years? Are you stable? So there's that whole vetting piece, and the past performance is part of that. Is what you're offering a FAR Part 12 commercial product or service? That's the big thing, because everything under the GSA schedule is commercial by definition. And then lastly, they want the very best price you would ever give anybody in the world, ever, ever, ever. And they're going to hammer that. They're going to come back to you. They're going to ask you for evidence. I think on the pricing, that's probably where the biggest piece of the negotiations comes into play. Yeah, that
Absolutely.
Sean is like nodding vigorously.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's the key. Wow, Sean, thank you so much. I have really enjoyed working with you on this today. I think there's been great information. I want to thank everyone who attended, not just this webinar, but the other three as well. If we
Absolutely.
missed, sure, if we missed anything or you have additional questions, please reach out to us. There are links on our website. We're at boostllc.net. That's boostllc.net. You're going to be able to find these webinars there under resources. We have blogs. We have other resources for GovCons. There's a ton of great stuff on our website. It's free. You may have to give us your email address so that we can talk to you about it, but otherwise it's yours for the taking. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate the participation, and we look forward to our next webinar with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.